Beyond the headlines, the noise, the spin, we seek the stories that live within. Past party lines, past powers disguised, we hear the truth in everyday lives. A space for voices, both gentle and strong. Beyond politics, where we all belong.
Hi everyone, my name is Jin Chen and welcome to Beyond Politics on Ozark Media. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Councillor Conroy Blood, Councillor of the City of Canterbury, Bankstown, representing the Canterbury or Budger ward, which covers Ashbury, Belfield, Campsie, Canterbury, Clempton Park, Croydon Park, Earlwood and Holston Park. At the same time, Conroy is also the Greens candidate for Canterbury for the 2027 New South Wales state election. Welcome, Conroy.
Thank you for having me.
Dare I say you have been flexing your muscles and ready to roll, so I thought it's time to schedule a chat. Now, let's look at your personal journey and your role in local government. You have been a lifelong resident of our local area and now as a councillor for 2 years. How have things been?
Yeah, I mean, it's been good. It's been really interesting to learn about how councils work, how decisions are made and how money goes into our community and how it's decided. And I guess one of the big reflections I've kind of had over the past 2 years is that you really have to earn the money in a way. But like those in power and politics treat it as a game, and where that money goes is where it's most strategic for them. And what I found is in the Canterbury and Bankstown area of our LGA, because there are no political threats to those who are in power, we don't get the same level of investment in areas where the community is more organised and together, and there are more political threats, like, for example, the Revesby part of our council, or more north in Burwood or Strathfield, those sorts of areas, yeah. So I guess that's my biggest reflection, but it's kind of like reinforced what I came into politics for, and that's like to build communities and connect people together. I think politics should be more than the ballot box, and it should be an opportunity to get people together to talk about issues they care about, political or not. And I guess I've really seen just in advocacy how important it is to build community and those connections and get them behind you. Yeah.
That's a very frank start to our interview, but we'll dive into that a little bit later. Share with us some of your proudest achievements. Yeah,
I mean, I guess the position I hold on council is one of 15, and where the power is in council is in Labor, because there's 8 of them. What happens in their caucus pretty much determines what goes through council. So I guess in terms of the more like practical achievements that I've managed to get them on board with, I guess recently for the first time, Canterbury Bankstown of its own accord decided to live stream meetings, and I think that was a really good progression. I think it's really important for accessibility, but like I've had other motions that have done things I'm really happy happened. Like we had a trial of free pools on a really hot day last year. And like some of the results were a little bit mixed because it was advertised with little notice, but it has shown some sort of promise. And I know that council's sort of got its eyes on what the Inner West and other neighbouring councils are doing to encourage people to keep cool on the increasing number of hot days we're going to have during the climate crisis. And I think I had another motion that coincided with council doing a bit of a bin audit along the Cooks River, and they've been making more of an effort to do that. I know that they haven't got it perfect, but those are some of the like more like hard political achievements. But like in terms of the smaller side of things, one of the things that makes me like feel most grateful and accomplished is not when I get things done, but it's when I speak to a part of the community that otherwise isn't heard in politics. It's quite often that I'm the only person bringing a certain perspective, either in opposing or in amending a motion. And when people, I'll often get community members or from groups say, thank you for saying that. That's how I feel. You know, you made my part of the community feel seen, and no one else is doing that. So it's kind of, I guess the little things like that make me feel proud, just ensuring that a section of the community is represented. Because, of course, we're a huge LGA and there are people with a diverse range of views and perspectives. And I think that's what's great about local government as an area of government, how it allows those perspectives to be represented by not having like single member wards, but having those multi-member wards. I think it's a good thing for democracy and a good thing to ensure that the community at least feels heard. Yeah.
Who are the members that are not listened to you're talking about in general?
Well, often it could look like people who are worried about the climate crisis, are worried about the state of our rivers, are worried about the demolition of trees in our area and the falling tree canopies. In other senses, it could be people from underrepresented groups like people with disabilities who need more like accessible footpaths. It's all sorts of groups depending on what sort of perspective I'm bringing. Yeah.
And I really like your work on the tree canopy front because like walking under the sun is very tiring.
Yeah.
But your life outside of council work, I understand you also assume a leadership position in University of New South Wales student organisation. Some might say that student or campus life may be a little bit of ivory tower. But how do you actually use that experience to help you when you lead the community on the ground?
Yeah, well, I think there are lots of similar overlapping skills from that. So I'm on the board of the Student Association, which and the purpose of that association is to deliver the services students need. And obviously students come from a wide range of experiences. So, you know, there are a lot of international postgrad students who have ridiculously high fees, and all they want out of the service is support with visas or you know, food and cost of living support, whereas there are, you know, undergraduate students who live at home and what they want is a good student life where they can connect with friends and find their community. And it is an organisation like council that kind of has a set budget where you have to both manage differing priorities. Obviously, residents in Canterbury Bankstown also have a huge range of priorities, but also manage risk. So I think in that sense, it's sort of helped me gain those skills to sort of weigh up the interests of different groups or people in the community, and I guess have a tolerance and an appreciation for risk in terms of what we're doing. Because sometimes when council wants to try something, they don't know how it's going to go. So yeah, I guess it's helped me gain an appreciation for those things. So I think there is a sense of overlapping skills for sure.
Transferable skill sets.
Yeah.
You have shared with us before you developed an interest in climate change and environmental protection from when you were really young. But was it at uni when you officially joined the Greens Party?
No, it actually was in high school. I joined the Greens in my later years of high school. And I think there were a range of things involved with that. Obviously, like the escalating climate crisis was one of them. And like, I'd see visceral images on the news of koalas on fire during the bushfires, and I'd see like the changing reef over time. So that was definitely part of it too. But like, I'm with the Greens not just for their stance on environmentalism. Like, another thing that kind of brought me into the fold is like some of my experience growing up. I kind of lived between two worlds almost, because I moved between my parents' houses, and my mum lives in Canterbury, which is a more affluent area. You know, we've got lots of green space, a well-connected community. But my dad lived in the Housing Commission in Riverwood, and he due to like bipolar disorder, he's like reliant on disability support payments. He's a very intelligent person. He has a PhD. He's like across everything in science, in politics and economics. But just seeing the way they were treated differently, how well the Canterbury community was connected compared to Riverwood, and seeing the way that like Homes New South Wales treated my dad, I guess it really made me feel a sense of injustice. And the Greens, in terms of like economic inequality, I guess they made me feel seen and confirmed what I felt, that things weren't right. And obviously there are, we need to be promoting equality, and I guess the way they framed it is that we can help people like my dad without hurting people like my mum. There is a set, not of ordinary Australians who live in affluent areas, but there's a set of people who have literally billions of dollars that they're not doing anything with, and that money could be used to help those who are worst off in community. So I guess it was kind of those two things that brought me into the fold. It was seeing the climate crisis and having the Greens really be the strongest voice for it, but also them making me feel heard or seen, that the economic disparity in this country, and as well as the treatment of First Nations people in this country, is just not right. Yeah.
On the topic of the Greens Party, I guess major parties are often criticized for not being democratic or not being transparent enough. But how does the Greens actually work in reality?
Yeah, I mean, what I like about us is we're the only party where our MPs are bound by what our members say. That's not to say that our members decide like the exact intricacies of our policies, but how our conferences work is that our members vote on principles, so sort of like broad rather than narrow objectives for how the party should operate. Our members also vote on things like budget, strategic seat targets, whereas in the major parties, that's all done by like a few people in a private room that no one hears about. But I think the other good thing about us that the other parties don't do is the way when we bring policies to the election, we test them the most rigorously. We go through an independent parliament authority called the Parliamentary Budget Office, who costs our policies and says whether it's feasible. Despite what people say that the Greens policies can't be achieved, everything we bring to an election is independently tested, all to see like whether it can be funded feasibly, and it always comes back as so. Whereas like Labor and Liberal, they go to consultants who are also doing work for the businesses that are affected by their policies, which is obviously a huge conflict of interest. And One Nation, who are on the rise, don't even cost their policies at all. They do no analysis about whether it would work. So we are the party that is most led by our members in terms of forming the principles. So we're far more democratic in that sense. But in terms of putting those principles into practice, we are the most rigorous evidence-based party, and I think that's a really good thing.
Okay. Looking at your role now as a state candidate, new blood for Canterbury. What encouraged you to stand, and what strengths do you bring that other candidates don't?
I think what encouraged me to stand was just how little investment there is in the community. Again, if you look at the amount of money that's going into Canterbury compared to electorates where the community is more organised, or electorates where whoever is in power is more at threat, the investment in our community is, to be honest, very, very poor. And what I want to do, in a way, even if I don't win, is try get cross-sections of the community organised together, realising that, hey, our community could be served better. And I guess making Labor feel like they have to earn votes in Canterbury. Sophie Kotsis was elected with a 60% primary. If she was elected with far less than that, and the seat was marginal, she and the Labor Party would have more of an interest in putting money and resources into fixing our river, into fixing our roads, into planting trees in our community. So I guess really what I want to do is, even if I don't win, is make Labor feel like they have to work for our votes. They're not guaranteed, and kind of get the community together, emboldened. Because when the community is together on a joint campaign, rather than just like writing one-off letters, we're more powerful and more likely to achieve the change we deserve.
That's actually a very practical perspective. But a lot of residents may disagree with you. For example, just as an example, a lot of residents may feel that our area, the wider Canterbury Bankstown area, is getting better and better. After all, we're getting a new metro, ice rink, aquatic centre, redeveloped Canterbury Hospital, and towards the Bankstown side, you have a university, you have another hospital down the track, and when you look at the river, which you touched on, you have different levels of government working together to improve the river underway, which is a process underway. So many residents may feel our area is doing well, but you don't agree with that view.
No, not really. I mean, I think in the very recent future, the very recent past, we've heard some more promising things about Canterbury Hospital, but to be honest, this has taken far too long. And it's been re-announced several times across multiple elections. It does look like the project is finally going out to tender, which is a good thing. But it's really interesting to me that the upgrades to Canterbury Hospital only suddenly occur when there's a huge private hospital proposed next door. And I think looking at what we've seen in the Northern Beaches recently, having like relationships and links between private and public hospitals is something that necessarily might not be a good thing. I guess on the subject of the metro took a year longer than it should have to start being built. The construction time has doubled, and the state government has refused to take accountability for it. And now what we've seen is the active transport cycleway that's supposed to go along the metro was originally meant to be opened a year after the metro finished. Now the state government is giving Sydney Metro a buffer of 2 years and are refusing to explain why. And I think people are quite upset about it. Now I think a lot of people do prefer the metro as a form of transport to the train. It is more comfy, it is newer, and it will be a little bit faster and come more quickly. But I think what a lot of people don't know is that there was an upper house inquiry in 2020 that said at a fraction of a cost, we could have achieved all these things just by investing in signalling upgrades across the Sydney, the Sydney area. And what we could have done instead is fast-tracked this metro that's going to be proposed by 2040 that's going to is going to be an orbital network that'll pass through Bankstown and connect, I think to Hurstville. As my perspective is so much of Sydney is already unconnected, I'd rather we spend money connecting parts of Sydney that aren't connected than making existing lines like marginally faster at like a huge bill to the taxpayer. Yeah.
I get your point. I'll stay on the topic of the metro then. Staying on the topic of the metro then, your recent motion at the June council meeting was defeated. What happened?
To be honest, I don't know. I asked Labor about it afterwards because they're the party that holds power in council, and they said it was asking too much. I really don't understand that perspective. Fundamentally, all it was asking for was answers as to why Sydney Metro didn't step in, why Transport for New South Wales didn't step in earlier to and say to Sydney Metro, look, your plans for emergencies are unsafe and uncompliant with the laws. Can you fix this? They did it way too late. And it was also just asking the question of why are you now doubling construction time for the Metro Cycleway? What they might perceive as being as asking too much is one of the dot points I had in there, asking for free metro travel for 6 months to compensate commuters for the struggle. But we've just seen free public transport in all of Victoria for 3 months. But I just think like even if they didn't like that bit of the motion, that's what amendments are for. If you only half agree with a motion, I think you should amend out the bits of that motion you don't agree with. So to be honest, I think this was just Labor and Liberal protecting their colleagues in state parliament and giving a cop-out answer, to be honest, yeah.
Okay. Why don't we look at your election platform up close?
Yeah.
And I quote, while families are being squeezed at the supermarket checkout, Hit with rising tolls, rents and bills, Labour has chosen to govern for their mates in big corporations. What mates in big corporations?
Yeah, well, so the Labor and Liberal Party are completely captured by corporate interests. Their campaigns are entirely reliant on donations from big businesses like the coal and gas companies, for example. They take hundreds of thousands of dollars from companies like Santos, who in turn pay no tax. Whereas the Greens as a party don't take donations from any corporations. We only take donations from individuals. And I think in that sense, you can see that in a number of the priorities in the recent New South Wales state budget. So, for example, there were hundreds of millions of dollars spent subsidising the native forest logging industry. So what the native forest logging industry does is it cuts down native trees that have survived colonisation to be used like for paper. But the thing is, this is not a profitable industry. It's an industry that actually makes a loss. And what they're doing is they're subsidising that loss in the on the taxpayer rather than helping regenerative logging businesses who grow trees specifically to be cut down for paper rather than like logging old trees, which usually have like native animals like sugar gliders. But the other thing as well is there was huge subsidies for clubs who have poker machines. And poker machines are absolutely destroying our community at the benefit of big corporations. And this is Canterbury Bankstown is the council in the state which has the biggest losses for poker machines. And that's something to be concerned about. But I guess other things you can like look at is the erosion of public space in our communities, which is being sold off to private interests. So, for example, in Earlwood, there was a site on Bayview Avenue that backs up onto the Wallay Creek Regional Park and has a bluff, which is like a big significant rock. And this would be like an awesome entry point for public open space. But the New South Wales government tried to sell it off to a developer unsuccessfully. There was also public land in Peace Park, Ashbury, sold off. And the other thing we're seeing now is rising data centres being built across the LGA, particularly in the west. Our community hasn't been affected so much. It's mostly been the more western parts of Sydney. But we're about to see, there's a proposal just outside of our LGA at the site of the old Clr Golf Club, which is right near Wallay Creek Regional Park, where there's a flying fox colony. It's right near. It's proposed to be right on the banks of the Cooks River, and Labor, to be honest, has done nothing to stop the growth of data centres, which disturb wildlife, which draw on power, which draw on energy. I genuinely think it's the biggest threat to climate at the moment, and Labor's been too scared to call a moratorium. And I guess to give like an anecdote. I have a good friend who lives in Lane Cove, which is the data centre hotspot. Oh. His hot water, 5 minutes. He can only have 5 minutes of hot water in the shower. And this is what people in our community are going to be facing. And Labor just does not care because their vested interests have been captured by the big technology and AI companies. And that's what I see happening across the state. So I think it's really important to give political power to parties who are powered by people, not by donations of big corporations.
So on housing and development, where do you stand?
I think the biggest piece to the housing puzzle is building more public housing. Public housing is actually shrinking in our state, and Labor is like conflating public housing and affordable housing as if they're the same thing. So public housing is provided at 25% of someone's income, whereas affordable housing is 80% of market rate. If you're someone like my dad who lives on the disability support pension, you wouldn't be able to cover 80% of market rate. The other trend they're doing is building social housing and conflating it as if it's the same thing as public housing. The problem with social housing is, although it's charged at 25% of income, it's run by companies, and for that reason, they have an incentive not to take on the people who have the lowest income and who might have mental health issues and struggle to pay it from time to time, but people who are wealthier. So I guess what we're seeing in this state is a shrinking amount of public housing. On the private side of things, am I suggesting that we shouldn't build any more private housing? No, absolutely not. But I think where this new private housing is being built, it should be holistically planned on a place-based basis. We should have more density in areas that are near shopping centres, train stations, parks, as well as preserving heritage, of course, and building with materials that fit the fabric of the community. All new buildings should not be connected to the gas pipeline, which the state government thinks it should be. But I think the big problem with the state government's housing policies is they're not doing this place-based development. What they're doing is drawing circles on a map to decide where communities should be upzoned, because that's what the housing development, what the transport-oriented development policy was. They went to train stations and metro stations across the city and literally drew circles and said, if you're within this circle, you can now build 12 stories. If you're within this circle, this bigger circle, you can now build, I think it was 8 and 6 stories, something like that. And look, they did give councils an opportunity to make their own plans to be more flexible to transfer that growth. But the problem was they gave councils like us, Inner West and Canterbury, a ridiculously short turnaround, which meant the council just wasn't able to hire hire staff, because no planning staff wants to take like a really short-term project. So council had to give that work to consultants who did it on really short turnaround, which meant that the plans that were given for our suburbs, to be honest, weren't awesome. Some were better than others, and I think different consultants did different quality of work. But yeah, I think that's sort of the first problem. The second problem, which is also linked to place-based planning, is I think this new housing development authority they've created is bad planning processes. I think, as I said, that when you're planning for growth, you should do it holistically and look at a suburb as a whole. What the Housing Development Authority does is allows someone who owns a specific site to say, I want you to upzone my specific site. And when we consider sites in isolation, I think it's more difficult to get good planning outcomes and think about setback, think about shadows, think about tree canopy, think about open space. And some of the proposals that are coming to the Housing Development Authority are absolutely obscene. Like there's a proposal for a 39-storey development next to Campsie Station. Campsie is one of the hottest suburbs in Sydney. There's already a huge risk, a risk of heat stroke during the summer. That's what the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment is saying. But when you get a 39-storey tower, all the wind gets pulled to the ground, and the shadow it casts makes it really hard to plant trees and plants that would reduce urban heat. So I think some of the proposals we're seeing to it are just ridiculously obscene. The site's right next to Campsie Station. I'd be happy if it was a tall building, 15 to 20 stories, but it's just ridiculous. But yeah.
I guess, just playing the devil's advocate here, can the considerations not be from a precinct activation, nightlife, entertainment, kickstart the economy, leveraging existing transport connections? Can there not be considerations of this aspect?
Well, I think you need to leverage existing transport connections. I do think the best place to build density is around transport stations, but I don't think you should just draw circles to decide where those how those should be built. I think if a site is right next to a station, it should be a bit taller than a site that's 400 metres away from the station. And if there could be two sites that are both 400 metres away from the station, and one is right next to a park and some shops, and one is not. The one that's right next to a park and some shops probably should be higher and more dense than the one that's not. Because if we're putting people in dense housing, we want to ensure that they're not going to be jumping in a car as much as possible. We want to ensure that the most important places they have to get to, like a park, like a shopping centre, like work, are accessible on foot or on public transport. But yeah, I think just drawing circles isn't the way to go about it.
Okay, moving on. Multiculturalism. On the topic of multiculturalism, you have said Labour are now engaged in a race to the bottom when it comes to attacking and undermining migrant communities, including right here in Belmore. Explain this position to us.
Yeah, look, I think this is particularly most evident if you look about the way they've been speaking about the ordinary people who often are multicultural and Muslims who've been protesting what's happening in Palestine. Obviously, in Belmore, there was a vicious assault on Greens candidate Hannah Thomas, as well as other ordinary members of the community who were standing on a footpath. Standing on a footpath is not illegal. You don't need permission from the police or anyone to stand on a footpath. And some of the sentiment we heard from Labor politicians was disgusting, and it was almost like victim blaming them, suggesting they were in the wrong by using words like unauthorised public gathering. All an unauthorised public gathering is a public gathering you don't tell the police about. If I go with a group of 5 mates to Paul Keating Park without telling the police, that's also an unauthorised public gathering. I don't think that's anything. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But I think that's the most prime example. But if we look at the responses of Labor to One Nation as well, One Nation is dangerous, it's divisive, and multicultural people, not just multicultural people, disabled people, all sorts of people are scared about the rhetoric they're pushing. And Labor's response to One Nation voters has just been like absolutely inadequate, like saying stuff like, One Nation voters aren't bad. I think if you hold those racist sentiments, that ultimately is a bad thing, and I think that needs to be called out. And of course, people's politics aren't inherent, and I think that people across the centre and the left should be making an effort to reach out to those people and change their views. But I think their politics needs to absolutely be called out for the horrible things it is, and I think Labor's just honestly been completely inadequate in that.
How would you, in turn, then promote multiculturalism and social cohesion in our local area?
Yeah, I think the most important work for that would be done at a federal level. And there is a national anti-racism strategy that was developed over 2 years that's sitting unfunded by the federal government. But I think at a state and council level, I think the most important thing is that community leaders like MPs, like politicians, are very careful in the words they use and are not giving in and shifting to the popular sentiments of One Nation. So I think I want to be someone who is firm and strong against them and against their politics. I think, yeah, it's also about strengthening and building the community. Because when people hate others, it's often when they've never engaged with them,
Yes.
or they don't spend time with them, or they've never seen them. Because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all have the same experiences. We have families. We have shared interests. And I think one thing we need to be doing in our area more, and particularly in political campaigning, is bringing people together who come from a variety of experiences and connecting them together. And I'm hoping that in my campaigns, I can bring sections of the community who've never met each other together to see what they're like, I guess, yeah.
That's nice. Moving down from the election platform and focusing on grassroots issues, what's your approach to some of the most teething issues faced by our community, including roads, rates, rubbish, and cost of living?
Yeah, I think on the issue of roads, rates and rubbish, our roads, our rates and our rubbish probably are getting worse in our LGA. I think that's correct to say. But I think that's correct to say for all LGAs. If you look at our neighbours like Blacktown, Liverpool, Georges River, they're facing similar amounts of increases in potholes. And I think historically, councils have never had to foot the bill for all of these things and have always been reliant on some state and federal contributions. And what we've seen over a number of years is that support for councils from state and federal governments has just been decreasing. So if I was to get elected to state parliament, I want to be a voice of local government by ensuring that there is an increase in guaranteed funding for councils to meet these services, to fill all the potholes, to keep our roads safe, to collect the bins all the time. Yeah. And I guess on the issue of cost of living, it's probably the case that the federal government has the most powers to impact it, because they have the most powers over things like tax and regulating corporations. But that doesn't mean there are no things that like local governments or states can do. I think one of the most powerful things we can do in times of crises is create resilient communities. So I've been interested in looking at how we can get people to share things they don't need. So for example, like share toys for kids, or share gardening tools, so that rather than buying like a shovel or a planter that you use 5 days out of 365 days a year, you just borrow it for much less money. But I think having resilient and connected communities is really important, because when we all help each other out, I think that's a great thing. And often that's my response to like the issue of unmaintained verges. A lot of people in the council believe that if a verge, if someone's private verge is being unmaintained, it should be the responsibility of council to mow it. My thoughts on that is, if council mowed every lawn that wasn't being mowed, people would just stop mowing their lawn and let the council do that. But I think we need to look after our neighbours, and if your neighbour is not mowing their front verge, you should do that. I have elderly neighbours who are not capable of taking out their bins. We take turns on our street to take out their bins and like help them with their mowing and maintenance. And I think having more resilient communities who are connected to each other and are willing to help each other out and are not so individualistic is just something I want to build to help with some of those problems. Yeah.
And that sense of community spirit.
Yeah.
And finally, on the issue of demerger, and I am genuinely baffled on this issue. So there's a administration building, and there's a council administration building in Campsie that will be demolished and refurbished and built into something bigger and better. Why do people continue to link the project to demerger prospects? And like, I'm trying to follow the logic, but why is that, and why do people feel so strongly on this issue?
There are people in the community who have an agenda to suggest that council is trying to stop a demerger, and in doing such, they will misrepresent the projects that the council are doing. I want to be completely clear. If we were to demerge tomorrow, there would be no place to hold meetings in the city of Canterbury, because the existing building is completely uncompliant. The roof is completely damaged, and half of the building is just not occupiable. And the chamber, which is on the top floor of the building, the way to get to it is like a broken elevator that's completely uncompliant with modern fire and accessibility standards. So if council wanted to make that building meeting ready, it would cost tens of millions of dollars. But all that would be doing is preserving an ugly building that was made for another time. So I think this new building, which would have a space that is capable of holding meetings, is really good for the community, and actually would be necessary to allow us to demerge, which I hope that one day the community will get to vote on. I don't think it's a question for politicians. I think it's a question for the community. But yeah.
Interesting. Looking ahead, what are your upcoming priorities?
That's a good question. There's been an increase in some of the advocacy of organisations who are interested in gambling harm reduction. That's been a political project that's seen some enthusiasm recently. So at the moment, I'm thinking about how I can do everything I can to help them out because of just how bad gambling is in our community, and the use of poker machines to help people get off them. To be clear, it's not people who are the problem. It's the machines. They trap people. It's absolutely awful. I'm also ever so concerned about the rise in data centres, and I don't think this proposal in Ironcliffe will be the only one facing our community. So at the moment, I'm kind of thinking about what can we do to stop them from being built in our area, particularly in the bits of our community that are like ecologically sensitive, that they could do the worst like forms of harm. I'm also thinking about insect biodiversity a bit more at the moment. Council's thinking about how to get more trees in our LGA. But it's also important we think about the lower ground covers, like flowers, or other ground covers that are necessary for insects and pollinators who help our farmers to live in. And the threat of data centres is a big threat to those pollinators. So it's important we have plans in place to create habitats for them, and like. Those ground covers that would attract that would attract insects are much nicer to look at than your traditional grass, but also absorb more water, so they'd reduce stormwater costs for councils, reduce the number of potholes. So I think even from a roads, rates and rubbish perspective, like that investment is something that would be really good for our community. But yeah, I guess those are kind of what I'm thinking about the most at the moment.
Wonderful. I am a tree and plant person, so I do love that idea. Now, last but not least, you have outlined a case for change, and your achievements at a relatively young age are frankly exceptional. But to now stand as a state member, that's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
I mean, my perspective is that state politics and council politics inherently involve the same things. It involves taking a mandate to your residents at election time and executing that mandate. It's about being a reachable and representative advocate as issues come up in your community. I think it's true to say that the stakes and the sorts of issues you deal with in state parliament are higher, but for that reason, state politicians are treated very differently. On council, I'm not paid a full-time salary. I don't have a PA. I don't have any staff. If I was to be a state parliamentarian, my salary would be significantly higher. I'd have access to personal staff. I'd have access to all sorts of departments who'd be able to do things that I myself are doing, like reading and understanding motions and parliamentary reports, like writing speeches, like organising meetings, like putting me in touch with the community. So fundamentally, I do think that the role of being an MP and being a councillor is the same, and hopefully if the community thinks I've been doing a good job as a councillor, that will be reflected in the election result.
On that note, thank you, Conroy, for joining us today. And regardless of the election outcome, best of luck.
Thank you.
And to our audience, stay tuned to the next episode of Beyond Politics. And of course, stay tuned to Oz Arab Media.